Can't sleep? Good. I don't want you to drift off just yet. These are the kind of stories that make the dark feel alive. The ones that sit at the edges of memory and rumor. The small-town accounts people trade in whispers. I'm going to tell you 3 of them. A childhood evening under an old tree where a swing moved on its own. A night at a fog-blanketed rancho where chains scraped at a door. And an adult mistake that turned into a long, invasive fear. They're all things I lived through or heard from people I trust. They're not neat endings. They're the sort of things that make you check the locks twice and turn the lamp on even when you don't plan to sleep. The first story comes from my childhood, from a neighborhood called Lomas Verdes, a place that felt half city and half woods when I was 11. Back then, my grandparents watched me most afternoons. They lived in a modest house with a little park across the street, one gnarled tree, a patch of grass, and a swing someone had tied up between 2 branches with thick rope. The swing was improvised. The seat was a slice of wood, sanded by years of feet, and the rope smelled faintly of old dust and rain. It was the kind of place where kids disappeared into afternoons and came back with scraped knees and big stories. That particular evening, the air held that clean, sharp smell that comes after a passing shower in the city, pavement and wet earth. It was late enough that the street lamps were doing their yellow thing, but not so late that the neighborhood felt abandoned. My grandfather sat on the stoop of our house, smoking quietly. He had this calm that made me feel safe, like nothing really bad could happen while he was there. I remember thinking about that, how the world felt contained. I went down to the park alone. I wanted to keep playing. The swing was empty. I pushed it with my foot, and it rocked back and forth with a tired creak. The night hummed with insects. Crickets circled us. Somewhere, 2 houses down, a television murmured. I remember the swing's rope in my hands, the coarse fibers against my palms, the way it smelled faintly of sap and rubber. Then, without warning, it moved on its own. At first, it was tiny, a small sway, like the wind had touched it. I waited, thinking someone was coming, thinking a kid would appear to take a turn. Nothing. The swing came back. It began to move again, slightly higher. There was a soft sound. The kind of laugh you make when you're alone and trying to be brave. You know that half-giggled children make when they pretend to be spooked? It was a sound like that, close and high, like someone barely breathing out delight. I told myself it was another kid, maybe a neighbor, but no one appeared. The laugh, the giggle, came from behind the branches, from the darker side of the tree, precisely where a child might hide during the game. I moved closer, heart thudding. My legs felt like rubber. I remember the grass bending beneath my knees when I crouched. I called out, "Hello?" My voice sounded small. The swing picked up speed. It was moving roughly now, the kind of motion that makes the board tilt and the rope strain. I can still hear the creak in my head, short, insistent. I climbed up onto the low branch nearest the trunk because I thought, in a child's logic, that might bring me face to face with whoever was there. I reached up, and there was a silhouette, not detailed, just a form in the way the moonlight broke across the leaves. I could see a child's head and shoulders leaning against the trunk, small and still. For a second, I felt less afraid, as if I had found a new friend. Then I felt something cold against the back of my neck, not touching me with fingers, but a chill, as if someone exhaled directly there. A whisper, a voice almost inside my hair, breathed, "Friend." I froze. I don't know how long I held my breath. My grandfather called from the stoop, his voice distant but familiar, and it broke the air around me. The silhouette slipped away like a shadow at first light. The swing slowed. The night gave up its tension in a sigh. After that, the park changed. I kept going back, searching. I took friends with me, and we sat on the swing in pairs, daring each other to stay until dark. Sometimes we would hear the same giggle, quick and close. Once, a kid from down the block told us he'd seen a small girl with tangled hair staring down at him from the branch and then vanish. That kid swore it wasn't a game. An elderly couple who lived on the corner, they'd been around my whole childhood, told us later that years ago a little girl had fallen from that same tree and died. They said the town had whispered about it for a while, but it wasn't a story anyone liked to tell aloud. The way the elderly woman described it felt like a memory that had settled into the neighborhood's bones. She was small, she said, voice thin with time. The branch gave way. Bad luck. It stayed here. She didn't use the word ghost. She didn't need to. The implication hung between us like a dry leaf. I like to believe the silhouette was something kinder, something that still liked children to play beneath that tree. Maybe it was my imagination, a combination of the late hour and the old stories that everyone fed each other. But every time I pass that spot now, the memory sits like a stone in my shoe. The whisper at the nape, the swing moving when there was no wind. I keep thinking of that little voice saying friend. Was it asking or warning? I can't quite tell. If you're still awake and this is getting under your skin, go ahead, tap like. It helps somehow. And keep listening. The second story is about a rancho out in Chiapas, a place where the nights get dense as wool. My father had land there, a wide open stretch with a single-story house that smelled like wood smoke and cooked corn. No streetlights. No neighbors within shouting distance. In the dry season, the air would fold into a fog at night, small droplets that clung to everything. Even as a kid and into my teens, that place felt like it had its own rules. You learned to move quietly so the house wouldn't wake the animals. You learned the sound of your own footfalls. That winter, I had gone to stay with my father for a few nights. He worked until late sometimes, and I would sit on the porch watching the horizon, waiting for the sky to go black. We kept a kerosene lamp in the corridor because the power was unreliable. The lamp's glow made every other shape outside look like a theater prop. One night, the quiet broke with a metallic thump. Not a distant sound, right outside, like someone slamming a bucket against a rock. At first, I thought it was the wind. Then it happened again, with a pattern. Thump, 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 almost like a heartbeat beating against the ground. The sound moved around the house, and for a moment I could have sworn it came from the direction of the corral where my father's horses were kept. I told myself one of them must have gotten loose, but the heavy gate was latched. I got up to check. The air against my face felt colder than the day had warranted. My chest tightened. On the porch, the lamp cast the corridor in soft yellow, and the shadow of the doorway pooled black. I moved carefully down the hall. Every creak was amplified, like the house had become a mouth whispering secrets. The thumping stopped. Silence. For a few seconds I told myself to laugh it off. Maybe a loose metal can, I thought. Maybe a branch falling. Then the footsteps started. They were too quick to be human. Not the slow, measured steps I'd known, but short, anxious, and somehow animal. They circled the house, skittering from one side to the other. I remember their rhythm like a bad song. When they crossed from the yard to the corridor, I felt them shift around me. They sounded as if someone had learned to mimic a horse's rhythm but couldn't keep it steady. Sometimes there was a neigh, too, a bray that didn't sit comfortably in the throat of a horse, closer to something larger trying to find voice. I locked the corridor door behind me. My father slept early. I didn't want to wake him. I wished for the simplicity of alarm at that moment. If it were just a burglar or a stray animal, you could name it and move forward. But this was unnamed. The sounds seemed to be everywhere and nowhere at once. They moved as if the house itself was breathing. Then came the chains. It started as a low dragging, a rumble against the floorboards that traveled along the base of the door. My mouth turned dry. My hands found the old broom behind the door. It felt absurd in my grip, as if a broom could hold back history. The sound grew harsher, a rusted metal rasp that scraped like fingernails over wood. It paced along the threshold, stopping, starting, as if listening itself. Then the chains. It started as a low dragging, a rumble against the floorboards that traveled along the base of the door. My mouth turned dry. My hands found the old broom behind the door. It felt absurd in my grip, as if a broom could hold back history. The sound grew harsher, a rusted metal rasp that scraped like fingernails over wood. It paced along the threshold, stopping, starting, as if listening itself. Then came the chains. It started as a low dragging, a rumble against the floorboards that traveled along the base of the door. My mouth turned dry. My hands found the old broom behind the door. It felt absurd in my grip, as if a broom could hold back history. The sound grew harsher, a rusted metal rasp that scraped like fingernails over wood. It paced along the threshold, stopping, starting, as if listening itself. I could feel the vibration through the soles of my feet. I pressed my back against the opposite wall and prayed in the way people do when they are both terrified and don't want to admit fear. A few half-formed requests to whatever name came easier in the dark. The dragging paused directly under the door. For a breath, everything held. Then it started again and crawled toward the hinge like something trying to come in. Minutes stretched. It could have been hours. The sound finally passed by. As the noise faded, I realized my hands were shaking so hard I could barely get the lamp steady. I don't remember the moment I fell asleep, only the relief when morning came and the world became rational again. A rooster crowing, the sun bright and ordinary. I didn't tell my father. I couldn't explain it. He would have told me to be brave, to stop letting my mind play tricks. Instead, I kept it to myself. Later, I spoke with older neighbors, men who had lived in that area their whole lives, hands like leather and voices low. One of them told me about a time, decades ago, when a traveler had been tethered like a beast near the corral and then found gone in the morning. The earth around the post churned as if something had been dragged away. Another swore he had seen strange lights bobbing around the fence at midnight and had left immediately. These were the kinds of stories that didn't depend on proof. They were the neighborhood's way of describing an unease that didn't have a simple name. I still think of that night in Chiapas when I hear metal on metal. It isn't the fear of a being that keeps me awake. It's the way something small and persistent can unsettle the entire world you thought you knew. The dragging under the door was not loud in a cinematic way. It was intimate. It pressed against the threshold and suggested there was something just beyond comprehension, testing whether the barrier would hold. I never told my father. People who live on land like that learn to carry certain things like a secret weight. Maybe it's shame for having been scared. Maybe it's an instinct to not stir up old stories. Whatever the reason, that night stayed with me, tucked like a splinter under the skin. When I tell this, I ask myself, was it misinterpreted sounds? Animals? Weather? Probably part of it. But the way the house answered, the way the sound moved around the rooms and paused under the door, stayed with me in a way ordinary sounds do not. It lodged in my memory, and some nights it wakes me up just to laugh at how small I am in a world that sometimes hums with things we cannot name. Between the rancho and the last tale, take a breath. Let the air move. Listen for your own house settling. Most of the time, it will be nothing. But that pause, notice it. It is part of the story. The third account is the one that changed how I think about trust. This one happened later, in Saltillo, when I was an adult and thinking I had outgrown the petty terrors of childhood. I had been raised in a family where rituals and religious practice were part of life, but as I grew older, I began to drift, quietly separating the parts of belief that comforted me from the parts that felt constricting. I won't say I abandoned my roots entirely, but I opened myself to other ideas. That shift wasn't a dramatic rebellion. It was slow, a drawer closed in stages. I fell into a relationship with someone who seemed, at first, to be different in a way I admired. She had a confidence that bordered on intensity. We were together for a while. Things were ordinary: dinners, work, small shared routines. It was when the relationship frayed that things went off the rails. We started arguing about faith. I wanted gentle distance, she wanted commitment. The fights were small at first, missing calls, sharp words. Then she left. I thought that would be the end. She packed a few things, took some of her prescriptions, medication for anxiety mostly, and walked out. I expected the usual aftermath of a breakup: awkwardness in town, a period of silence, maybe a call from a friend. Instead, our home became a place where small invasions started happening. It began with little things: a drawer slightly ajar, a piece of jewelry moved. Then more unsettling signs: dark stains on small paper bags left near the baseboards, the smell of meat that didn't belong in the pantry, and once, in the bathroom, a pile of ashes shaped into a crude circle on the floor. Not all of these were obvious at the same time. Some I noticed, some friends noticed when they came over. I found that at work, colleagues began telling me they caught flashes of movement near my office window, or that someone had been walking behind me in the hall when no one was there. It was as if something had slipped into the edges of my life and set itself there like a weight. I kept thinking, coincidence, stressed people misplace things. But you're not alone in noticing the same oddities. One of my coworkers mentioned seeing a shadow by the copier just when a sound of whispering passed through her office. Another saw the silhouette of someone at the bus stop who disappeared as the bus came. These were all small, isolated observations, but together they knitted into something that felt deliberate. The moment of discovery that made me stop pretending came on a day when I insisted on cleaning properly. I hadn't slept well for months. There was a constant edge under my skin. I lifted the bed skirt to get the dust bunnies. My hand brushed against something tucked under the mattress. I almost didn't look. I told myself to ignore it, to close the bed skirt and go back to the living room. But curiosity has its own stubbornness. Under the bed were a few small bags. They were the kind of bags people bring to the market, thin, crumpled. A dark stain marked one of them. It could have been coffee, I thought. It could have been mud. There was also a small piece of what looked like raw meat, wrapped in a bit of cloth, and, beside it, a circle traced in a grainy ash, faint enough to have been missed if you didn't look directly. Nothing dramatic, no words written in threats, no labels pinned to the items. The setup felt intimate, as if someone had leaned close and left a signature I didn't want. I remember the air in the room folding over me. My heartbeat was loud. I called a friend and told her, and she came over with a calm that steadied me just enough to not make a scene. We didn't take the items to the police. The idea of standing there in a uniform and explaining a circle of ash and a wrapped bit of meat felt embarrassing and absurd. Instead, we did what people in that town often do. We went to a shaman. When I say shaman, it's important to understand what I mean. Not the dramatized figure on a screen, but a local healer, someone older who has tended the small hurts and the larger worries in the community. She lived on the edge of town in a house hung with dried herbs. I sat opposite her with the bag in my hands. She didn't need my whole story. These people learn to read the small signs. She asked me questions and listened, and when I left, she told me what I already suspected. Something had been placed. Her method was slow and careful. She burned certain herbs, drew symbols, and chanted in a low voice. It seemed strange at first to open myself to that. I had been half skeptic, half curious, but there was a relief in the rhythm's rhythm. She told me to wash my bedding a certain way, to shake out my clothes at dawn, to carry a small amulet for a while. Whether the amulet did anything in a metaphysical sense is not something I can prove. What I can say is this: eventually, the whispering settled, the small invasion stopped, and the feeling of being watched loosened its grip. Months later, I saw the person I had been with. She was thinner, hunched, and moving like someone who had been worn down by life. I didn't approach her. I felt something complicated: pity, anger, a hollow kind of sorrow. I never accused her to her face. Maybe she had done something out of anger, or maybe she had been moving through her own dark place. I never know for sure. People are complicated. What I do know is that the things I found under that bed were never explained to my satisfaction, and the remedy that helped me was the simple, human kind: ritual, company, and time. You can call it closure or superstition. Call it what you like. But the point is this: some betrayals are tangible, and some are not. The latter can be more ruinous because they creep beneath your skin. I spent nights replaying incidents, trying to find logic in the pattern. The shame of having been targeted, the way a private space felt violated, that lingered long after the visible signs were gone. After the shaman's cleansings and a slow rebuilding of my routines, things returned to a manageable normal. I sleep with a little more caution now. I lock the windows twice. I keep the lamp on until I'm actually ready to sleep. The lesson was small and bitter. We give parts of ourselves to people, and some of those parts can be used in ways we never imagined. Whether the items were meant to harm or to scare, whether they were symbolic or literal, those lines remain blurred in my memory. The experience didn't make me a believer overnight, nor did it make me immune to doubt. It left me wary and a little kinder when others tell me strange things. After all, it's difficult to argue with the lived feeling of being unsettled. Not proof, just a persistent sense of wrongness. When I think about these three stories together, the child under the tree, the chains at the rancho, and the invasion under the bed, a pattern forms that isn't supernatural exactly. It's more like a human truth about what unsettles us. Children and elders both know how to tell certain things without naming them. The giggle in Lomas Verdes could be memory. The scraping at the door in Chiapas could be an animal or a past incident pressing on the present. The ritual items in Saltillo could have been intended as revenge, protection, or an elaborate act of anger. What connects them is not evidence of something otherworldly. It's the sensation of the unknown pressing in on a life. Night is the time when the edges of our world blur. Sounds grow teeth. Shadows become stories. When you can't sleep, your mind does what it does best. It stitches meaning from thin threads. That's why stories like these grip us. They are small, plausible, and stubborn. They don't tidy themselves into proofs. They sit instead like untied threads, waiting for someone to continue them. I don't want to promise you a tidy lesson. I can't tell you what exactly is real in these accounts. What I can tell you is this: the fear that keeps you up isn't always about something out there. It's also about your inability to fit an event into your map of the world. It's not the chains that haunt you as much as the knowledge that something scratched at your threshold and you could not name it. It's not the silhouette that lingers, but the memory of the whisper in the nape of the neck. If one thing stays with you from these tales, let it be the human part. The way neighbors talk quietly at the corner store. The way an old couple remembers a fall from a tree. The way a home can be made to feel unsafe. Those are the small, credible things that make the strange feel possible. They are the things that turn sleep into a battleground. Before I go, if you have a story like one of these, something that made your skin prickle at night, tell it in the comments. Say where it happened, as simply as you can. We don't need proof. We need to know we're not alone in being kept awake by the dark. Subscribe if you want more of these quiet, unsettling accounts you can listen to when the house is asleep. And if you're headed to bed after this, do me a favor. Check the corners once, turn the lamp on, and know that sometimes the worst thing is not what you see, but what you can't explain. Good night, or good luck.